In today's lesson, we are looking at factors that affect growth. This fits in with the standard from NGSS MSLS 1.5, which is to construct a scientific explanation to show how environmental and genetic factors influence the growth of an organism. In today's lesson, our learning intention is just that: construct a scientific explanation based on evidence for how environmental and genetic factors influence the growth of organisms. And by the end of the lesson, you should be able to define growth, define environmental and genetic factors, give examples of genetic and environmental factors, and summarize how genetic and environmental factors affect growth. To start off with, in your notes, the first thing is that we need to just recognize that all living things, so all organisms, grow. Growth of living organisms occurs when the organism increases in size and mass. So this doesn't necessarily mean it's becoming smarter or becoming more mature, ready to reproduce. It simply means it is getting bigger. Plants and animals, both of them have their growth affected or influenced by environmental and genetic factors. So in the next slide, we're going to describe environmental and genetic factors. But right now, what we can say is that if conditions are ideal, so if the environment is ideal, a plant can grow to its maximum size being determined by its genetics. So in your notes, pause the video and make a chart that looks something similar to this, okay? You'll notice that we've got an extension opportunity over here where you can research tropisms, which is where the environment and genes kind of come together to affect the plants. But for the rest of us, what we're looking at factors that affect growth, okay? So the first one that we're going to look at is genetic factors. Genetic factors are what is inside the organism. It is that DNA, those chromosomes that are inherited from the parents. Every living thing has DNA in their cells. It's found in the nuclei of the cells, and you get it from your parents. So that is your genetic factors. So already you have something that is determining what you're going to become. Some examples of that are just that, DNA, and also your hormones. Your hormones are genetic factors. So it's things that affect you from inside. Moving on to environmental factors. Environmental factors are outside the organism. They're also known as ecological factors. So when you think about the environment, you think about everything that surrounds you. And all of those things can affect how well you grow. There are two types of environmental factors: biotic factors and abiotic factors. We are going to start with biotic factors. Biotic factors include basically how we relate, or plants relate, to other living organisms, such as insects, microorganisms, worms, bacteria, and other living things. A lot of those things can cause diseases. In plants, we'll see an example in a bit. In plants, it's a little bit harder sometimes to tell unless the plant is being infected and then starts to die, get holes, change shape. In humans, we know this from the fact that we can be infected by bacteria and we can end up needing antibiotics. There's also parasites and other things like that, which ties in with the symbiotic relationships here. Okay? You're welcome to look into symbiotic relationships. There are three types. That is mutualism, where both organisms benefit; parasitism, where one organism feeds off of its host; and commensalism, where one organism benefits and the other one is not affected at all. Okay? In terms of abiotic examples, we have climate, temperature, so things like the temperature, how much humidity there is in the air, the sunlight, the air quality overall is also affected. Okay? Nutrients available in the soil or in the water where the plant is growing. Soil quality, as well as how much soil there is, so the quantity. It makes a difference if there is if there is, if there is sandy soil versus clay soil versus rich, organic, dark, black soil, it all makes a difference as to how well the plant is going to grow. And lastly, we have how much water there is. The amount of water available to the organism, whether it's not enough or too much, can affect the growth as well. So, looking at a couple of examples of genetic factors include things that come from your chromosomes, so from your genes. Here we see an example of a disease that is a genetic disease that is passed down by the father. Looking at this family, what determines if the child is affected? So you'll notice they have 2 affected children and 2 unaffected children. What do you think happened? Well, when we look at this in more detail, you'll notice that the affected gene was passed to 2 children from the father, and the unaffected gene, the blue one, was passed to 2 other children from the father. The mother, having both unaffected genes, or alleles rather, passes them to all of the children. So the 2 children that ended up inheriting the affected allele from their father also became affected. Looking at biotic examples of environmental factors, here you can see what has happened to this leaf. So think about it for a minute. Do you have any guesses of what might have caused this? If you said disease, you are correct. This could be either potentially from a caterpillar that has infected it. It could be from wasps that will lay their larvae inside of different things. It could be many different insects that cause disease, or it could simply be some other form of disease as well that's causing the plant leaf to bubble and basically rot away. For examples of abiotic factors, we've got our environmental factors here. This is what we think of most of the time. So you can look here. What do you see in this picture? If you said you see the rocks, you see water, you see air, you see sunlight, those are all good examples of abiotic factors. So to finish off, in summary, at the bottom of your page, please summarize how environmental and genetic factors affect growth. Okay, so we've listed what they are here, but now I want you to think about how do they affect the growth? Go back to that idea of what do all living things need to grow? And if the conditions are not ideal, so for environmental, if the conditions are not ideal, how does that affect the growth of the organism? As well as how does what you inherited from your parents affect your growth? Once you've done that, please show your teacher your notes and move on to the next activity.